Hi there, my name's Simon Drew, and welcome to the Practical Stoic Podcast, where I give you practical Stoic advice for modern times. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/Simon Drew. I also do one-on-one mindset coaching, and you can book in your first free consultation by going to risetothegoodlife.com/coaching. On Facebook, you can join my group, the Practical Stoic Mastermind. But for now, enjoy this episode. Hi there, my name's Simon Drew, and welcome to the Practical Stoic Podcast. And in today's episode, we have our very first repeat guest. Most of you will know Kai Whiting. We had him in episode number 69, so if you haven't listened to that episode already, go back and check that out, and I'm sure you'll love it. But I was really excited to have him back on the show. He's been super busy lately, and he actually wrote a paper where he used Stoicism to view the question of whether or not Neanderthals were rational. Now, many of you, if you're like me, you'd probably be thinking, well, what does that have anything to do with Stoicism? How can that help me to live a better life? I had these questions too, and we go through all of this in today's interview. So I hope you enjoy it, and please let us know what you think. And I know that Kai is actually in our Facebook group, so if you have any questions for him, feel free to get on there and ask those questions. He'll be more than happy to answer them. But without any further ado, I present to you Kai Whiting, Part 2. Okay, everybody, welcome to the Practical Stoic Podcast. And today we have a repeat guest, actually our very first repeat guest on the show, Kai Whiting. It is awesome to have you back. How are you doing today?
It's really brilliant to talk to you today. I'm very pleased to be here and to have the possibility to share what's been going on in my Stoic practice.
Yeah, and I'm especially pleased that you're here. For everybody who's listening, they won't know this, but we've already actually put about an hour to an hour and a half into this podcast with no results. We tried to have our interview yesterday, but we spent all this time and there was just Wi-Fi problems on this end, and there was all sorts of problems going on. But I'm really, really excited to have you back here today. Everything seems to be working perfectly. We've been practicing our Stoicism, calming down after all of these technical glitches. But Kai, what have you been up to lately? Just tell us a bit. I know you've been super busy. You've been posting in our Practical Stoic Mastermind on Facebook. What's been going on?
Well, I've written co-authored some blog pieces about, say, more like social justice, because we were looking at like environment and material consumption in the last article, which you invited me to talk about in the last podcast. So people then started to ask more like social questions, like, okay, we agree that you should include the environment, but what do you really mean? So then we did a paper on are Neanderthals, or were Neanderthals rational? And then it was like, okay, why that paper? It's quite historical. Mm-hmm. But it was more like looking at whether humans are they good? Are they bad? What do we think in Stoicism that is the nature of humanity? Why do we think that? Really, so that we could ask the question of, if I understand myself as a human being and I understand those around me, how does that play out on a social level? Okay, we can talk about it from I now know that I should be virtuous. Therefore, as an individual, I can contribute to that. But how should I think about it when I start to move from sort of the individual to team play to then societal level play? So yeah, we're asking, what do Stoics say? Do they say that we're inherently good? Well, that's not the case. We say we have the capacity to be good. What does it mean to be human? Are there any caveats to that? And then we started to ask blog pieces like, what does social justice look like? Because a lot of like social justice warrior being bandied about. So what does social justice look like? Should Stoics be political? So we started to ask a whole wide range of questions, and I'm hoping that we can delve into them today.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I know that in this podcast particularly, everybody's interested in the practical side of Stoicism. And, if I have a guest on, they expect that they can walk away after listening to that podcast having something that they can take away from what that guest said that can help them to make better decisions, to look at the world differently, to look at themselves differently. So I guess, from the perspective of many of my listeners, they might be saying, well, look, obviously, of course, it's great to understand ourselves on a deeper level, to understand where we came from, understand why we make the choices we make. The more we can understand about humanity, the better. But maybe they'd be confused, what's the link between, maybe I'll ask, why did you ask the question, were Neanderthals rational? And how does that question actually, maybe why did you ask that? And then what did you actually come to a conclusion on? Like, what was the answer to that question? And then the third part to that question would be, how is this helping us right now, knowing the answer to that question? How is that helping us to make better choices in our life, especially to do with Stoicism and that sort of stuff?
I think there's a lot of emphasis in the current modern Stoic movement about ethics. But ancient Stoics also said there was an importance of physics. When I say physics, I don't mean like necessarily what we would classify as physics today, like say thermodynamics, but sort of natural sciences. To understand how we have to be grounded in fact and reality, to understand who we are and the nature around us. Because if we, for example, we don't believe in a certain aspect of science, we might have good reasons for doing that, then our understanding of how the world works is changed. So if we don't try to become more scientifically literate or understand the nature of the scientific process, then we've really got quite a strange set of beliefs and certain points. And within those beliefs, we will assent to an impression, or we will have an understanding of why somebody acts a certain way. So, for example, if we believe that human beings are inherently evil or inherently sinful, I'm not saying that people do believe that, but if we did believe that, then we wouldn't really expect people to act virtuously. And we might question why ourselves would do that. We might say we're fighting against our own nature. So if we took the approach that Darwin said, it was that fitness of the species was important and that we were naturally competitive, we were not naturally cooperative, then we might question why we should, act with self-control and say, surely we should propagate our own seed if we're men and, maybe go down to the nearest sperm bank and provide as much sperm as possible and then have as many, future generations as possible. Now, of course, Darwin didn't say that, has been interpreted as that. He actually said survival of the species, not an individual. And we found out, we didn't find out, but we wrote about the fact that humans are perhaps the most Homo sapiens are the most cooperative species. We have the ability en masse, in now billions, to understand, say, money, even though money doesn't really exist. So regardless of your religion, you'll still believe that money works. You'll still believe that money is a thing that you can use to buy other things, including hours of people's labor or goods. So we have come to the agreement on a huge scale that money has a role in society. That's because we are cooperative. Now, if you ask a chimpanzee to cooperate with you, that would be very difficult. So understanding that we're cooperative and that we go into a conversation like today thinking, I'm going to say a certain thing, he's going to ask me certain questions, and I have certain expectations about how you're going to act. And as you're a Stoic, I hope that you act virtuously towards me, and I expect you to do the same.
Don't count on that, but go on.
I won't count on the Wi-Fi, but I will count on that. But if I understand that, the nature of that relationship, then we have some kind of agreement, and I can, at some level, I would assume as a human being that other human beings would want to act virtuously, and that going against that is going against their nature, and that there's a misunderstanding of their humanity. So that's how, in a simplistic sense, that's incredibly important. So I looked at I looked at with a few people, what is it that makes us human? What is it that makes the virtues special? So I think there's a lot of grounding, and we can say, especially in this post-truth world, that scientists don't know what truth is. But I think it's a misunderstanding of the scientific process and how scientists independently, or quite independently, start to come to similar conclusions. So were Neanderthals rational? We think there's enough evidence to point as Stoics to say yes. So the fact that they buried their dead, the fact that they were able to hold a thought and process another one, So like a dog may not be able to do that. They have a lot of immediate response. So they're hungry, they'll do a certain thing, and they'll trigger an event in us, maybe like drag us to the kitchen, and when we feed them, they might not necessarily be able to hold a few thoughts in their mind to say, okay, if I do A, then I get B, then I'll get C, then I'll get D. And that's something called like cumulative culture, the ability that we have to stand on the shoulders of giants, to look further than we've already looked. Cats can't do that. They can't suddenly invent something that will help them feed better or communicate with us better in 7 or 8 generations, but humankind can really do that. And we do that through cooperation. And I think we do that as a Stoic through delivering on progress towards virtue. I think that's the cement that holds us together in society. So practically, what can you do about it? Because that was your first. So it's got, because you have 3 questions. So practically,
yeah,
what
sorry,
can you do about
I did
it?
give you a lot to talk about there. But yeah, I think I think I really do want us to get into that as well, because yeah, absolutely, everybody can agree that the more we know about science and earth and nature, the better it is for us, and the better it will be able to make us be clearer on how we should be making choices, and you know, in this particular area, I guess I'd like to ask, okay, so with every one of these scientific discoveries, there might be a certain way that it can help us to live a better life. So with this question, now that you know the answer to it, how can it help us to have a better life?
The question of were Neanderthals rational?
Yeah,
That
that's right.
question, or-
And now
okay.
that we know the answer, what does this lead to? What's next?
Well, I would be very careful with the word no. I don't know the answer because I can't, stand there and check whether my assumptions are correct. But with the indication that I have with my team that they are rational, it makes me rethink my relationship with animals, for example. We started off, would we put a Neanderthal in the zoo? That was our first question, like as Stoics, would that be reasonable? And then it got to the point where we realized that we definitely mated with them in the past. It's in their human genome, 2 to 3% if you're European. So we said, okay, wow, we would like mate with these people. So then it sort of blurred that line between what we classify today as human and everything else. So that understanding sort of cements our role, I think, as humans in the circles of concern. To say it really does, to me, suggest that the Earth does deserve an extra layer, because we proposed it in a previous paper that we discussed here on the podcast, but we had no real reason other than we had no Stoic reason to really include it, or not enough Stoic reason. So when we started to look at maybe we should think about animals as rational, or degrees of rationality, certain animals as rational and others having certain degrees of it, the way we treat them, the things that we eat, the way we see, say, zoos, the way we see habitats, because a lot of people want to save an animal, but you can't save an animal if you destroy its habitat. I think Australia is a very good example of that. And then things like the coffee cup that you said, that someone threw a coffee cup, right, last time. And if you thought about, I'm going to throw a coffee cup and I'm going to destroy a habitat of another creature, which has perhaps some rational aspects, then that would change your viewpoint on how you should behave, because you're understanding nature. You're bringing nature into your worldview as a Stoic. And you have a good reason to do that. That's based on rationality, not necessarily based on animal welfare, because that tends to be an argument by Stoics. And I have to remind them often, in Stoicism, we have no rights. We have no right to life. So we can't claim that there are animal rights in Stoicism. To kind of change it from rights to obligations towards the wider world. So as a Stoic, that's a practical thing, to start moving from I have rights within Stoicism to I have obligations, which I like, because I think it puts the emphasis on those that have power. Me personally, I think that, not to give their power and say, I need to help this person because I have a greater responsibility. I have greater capacity to make change. Whereas when I think about rights personally, and I use the Indigenous case in Australia, it's typically been white males who have decided that, maybe they should give certain rights to the native Australians.
Mm-hmm.
And then they tend to give those rights on what I would call white Australian male terms, based on what they think the rights should be of a native Australian, not based on what maybe a native Australian thinks their rights are, or how it fits in with their society and their societal norms. So it does have a very strong political aspect. So if you're if you're Stoic who's called to go into politics, or maybe work as a teacher who looks at social quota and who goes into university and who doesn't, or wants to address those issues, or even like a non-governmental organization, there are certain practical points. And if you didn't want to, if you said, well, I'm a mechanic, what does that have to do with me? Then when you reevaluate how you think about humans and how you think about different groups of societies, how you view them, you could say, do I view them through a Stoic lens? Like everybody is cosmopolitan, everyone has the ability to be, or the capacity to be rational, or do I view it from a lens that has been passed down to me through the historical ages?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you just brought up so many, so many areas that we could talk about there, but topics that we could talk about there. But I want to go back because, something that I really, really enjoy about what you said there about, what you found, you decided that Neanderthals were rational. And what there's kind of a theme that I'm seeing here, and it's, so as Stoics, we can all agree that, we have this sort of cosmopolitan view of the world where everybody in humanity is connected in some way. And this is such a beautiful concept because it really does put an obligation on us, as you say, to take care of everybody and to be as kind as we can, and take care of those around us, because when you take care of those people around us, then you help everybody. But what I'm hearing here is also that you're kind of trying to break down these barriers between us and the rest of the earth, which is nature and animals and everything else that is so incredibly important. And this is something that I'm really passionate about, because I honestly believe that many of the problems that we face in the world today are a result of us believing that it's us and then it's animals, it's us and then it's nature. Really, I feel like we share so much more in common with the entire earth and with nature and with animals than we currently recognize. And you could even see the research coming out lately that's talking about the ways that trees communicate. And you're like, oh my gosh, like if you had have told somebody, 50 years ago that trees communicate in forests through complex layers of moss and fungus under the roots and everything like that, or that when an animal is biting the bark of one tree, other trees around it will set off some chemical reaction in their bark to make it less appealing. If you had have told somebody that 50 years ago, they would have thought you were crazy. And I guess what I'm trying to say here is I see a theme in what you're trying to look for here is we are all connected, even in terms of animals and nature. We're connected on levels deeper than what we currently understand. Am I heading in the right direction there?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's called The Secret Life of Trees, isn't it? A remarkable book, which says like there is ability between trees to even look after trees that have been cut down. So there is organic activity going on that is not normal, or what we would expect as human beings when we see a tree stump. But the other trees are like passing certain nutrients to maintain that tree alive, even though it cannot help itself. So yeah, it's incredible. And I don't even think 50 years ago, I think 50 years ago, some of the people might have agreed when they were out about in nature. I think 2 years ago, you'd have a much more difficult point of view. Like climate change, there's a lot of people that I speak to who tell me that climate change does not exist, or global warming, and they point to the recent snowfalls in the US. And so if you don't believe, say, that climate change is a problem, then you have no issue of cutting trees down, right? Because you say, well, this earth is for us and we should propagate it and we should reproduce rapidly and we should, do our bidding. And unfortunately, I think that comes from the Bible. I don't think that it needed to be interpreted that way. But the conventional interpretation is to say, but God gave us the earth to subdue and said, go forth and multiply. And some people have taken that I would say, extreme. I don't think the Bible writers, or God, if he wrote it, meant that. I think it's more about, yes, you should be stewards of the earth, and that bit's overlooked. That's the part that's overlooked. So to come back on oneself and say, what is my nature, whether I believe in God or not? If God made the earth, then I should look after it. And if God did not make the earth, then I have an obligation to look after it anyway, because there's no one else that can. We are uniquely positioned, as Neanderthals are no longer with us, unless we suddenly clone them. But as they're no longer with us at this point, we have the obligation to make changes. We're living what the scientists call the Anthropocene these days, which means that they find that human activity is driving climate. So to be scientifically literate and to understand the nuances of climate change, and it doesn't mean that every day has to be hot. It just means you have to have extreme fluctuations between, say, hot and cold, which we have seen. In the UK, for example, a huge snowfall followed by the warmest day of the year in the spring. So you start to ask questions like, if I misunderstand climate change, then I misunderstand the nature of why that's happening. I might lose the Great Barrier Reef. If I lose the Great Barrier Reef, because they're getting bleached, the coral, I will lose fisheries. If I lose fisheries, people around the Pacific Ocean will die. The islanders that depend on that. Some of them may become, what I would say, climate change refugees. And then you have an immigration problem on a mass scale. And I'm not so sure that the UK or the Australian or the US government at the moment would be too happy to help a lot of migrants for looking at the policies that are coming out, unfortunately. And that's not a Stoic position to have regarding, whose passport is what and who should we let in the country based on where you're born, because a Stoic would say that's luck. They would say, if anything, it should be based on virtue. Is that person virtuous, for example?
Yeah, absolutely.
And progressing towards virtue, I should say, sorry.
We're definitely going down a rabbit hole here with the whole going into climate change, but I think it's important. I think it's really important to be talking about these big issues of today through a Stoic lens. If I could add anything, something that I often hear is, you'll hear people say, well, the Earth would be heading in this direction anyway with the climate. These things would be happening anyway if we weren't here, no matter what. This is just a regular cycle of the Earth, and I guess what I'd say to that is the science clearly shows that maybe even if it was heading in that direction, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but it might actually be heading in that direction anyway, no matter what we do. However, we're actually speeding up the process to a crazy level and making it happen so much faster than what it would have happened if we weren't here. Is that correct?
Yeah, there is the possibility that is a natural cycle, and I have no issue with that. And I correct environmentalists quite often, not necessarily academics, but people who like the environmental issues. And they seem to say it's the hottest we've ever had. I'm like, no, it's the hottest we have on record. The issue is not that we're hotter than we've ever had. The difference is that we are hotter than we've ever measured. And that when it was hotter last time, we did not have 7 billion people on the earth, most of them around the coast. In cities where water cannot drain easily, where water basins no longer really exist, like the Mississippi Water Basin. Before, if it flooded, and the Native Americans or the first peoples would know that would happen. That was part of the cycle. So people say that they point to a natural cycle and say this is a natural cycle, like El Nino or La Nina, which is another weather system. I'm like, yeah, okay, that's true. But are our cities the most vulnerable on Earth to climate change? Are they natural? And if they're not natural, what does that mean? Then we've caused an imbalance. So the effect of the natural cycle is not the same, even though the cycle may still occur. So when you think about the 7 billion people existing on a planet compared to, say, less than 1 million, you start to ask certain questions. And if you read The Secret Life of Trees, you'll realize that trees reduce the climate on a micro scale by 3 degrees in certain forests. And we can see that in the Amazon rainforest, where if you cut down the trees, it turns into desert because there's no longer that rain system. So they say that, naturally it's a cycle, yes, but we weren't cutting down the rainforest at that rate. We had rain, we have deserts now. And when we have deserts, we lost soil fertility because the soil was very thin. So yes, you can claim to me, and I'll quite happily accept that maybe we're going into a natural cycle. Which you can't then do is then reverse your claim when I tell you you can't build that there. That's a water basin, and we need that when it floods.
Mm-hmm.
You see, you can't have your cake and eat it in that respect. You have to be coherent. So if you say you want the natural cycles, then you should say, okay, then we shouldn't build in certain places because that interferes with the natural cycle. And if you say, yes, we are interfering and we're accelerating the process, then I say, yes, I agree with you. We have the ability to minimize that. How should we mitigate that? That may be looking at planning. That may be, in my opinion, planting more trees. So yeah, it's very difficult unless you follow your thought through, which Stoicism encourages you to do through logic and through physics or sciences. Then you will never, I think, have a coherent understanding of what's going around. And then when you don't understand what's going on around you, then perhaps you might vote for a certain person, but it's based on mismatches of truth or rhetoric. And that's a very dangerous position because I think we said quite clearly, or I hope we have said quite clearly, that Stoics are very political, but they don't belong to one party or another because particularly, I'm not saying you shouldn't vote for one or another, so that you don't always or particularly belong to one, because what you look for in a politician is their argument, is their reasoning, are their fact-checking. And that doesn't matter if you're left-wing, right-wing, or something else. You always are called as a Stoic to say, is the person on the left or the right making sense? Are they using facts or are they using opinion? And where did the facts they are claiming to use come from? So if they claim something in climate change, they might say Steven Pinker in Enlightenment Now said that climate change is not a major problem. He's a scientist, and I say he's a psychologist. So is he an expert on climate change? No. So maybe we should ask somebody who is, and then try to navigate through their fact checking and their opinion. I think that's what Stoicism really helps us to do. Quite unique. Are you quite uniquely, in my opinion?
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the greatest things, the parts of Stoicism, is this emphasis on wisdom and knowledge and education. They really push us to just learn as much as possible. It's just, and it's really hard. And when you subscribe to a philosophy like this, you do take on certain obligations, certain responsibilities. It's kind of like one of those defining moments in your life where it's before this moment and then after this moment. When you decide that Stoicism is a philosophy that you're going to adopt and use in your life, there's not a lot of excuses for not having an informed opinion on many of these subjects. I struggle with this myself. It's difficult. It's difficult to, for example, watch the presidential debates, something that I absolutely love to watch. But, the thing with Stoicism is absolutely what you said there. It doesn't belong to one side or the other. It doesn't belong to Republicans. It doesn't belong to liberals. But when we're all involved in this sort of tribal mentality of I'm either left or I'm right, and you can see this if you go on Facebook pages with Stoics, there are some people far on the right and there are some people far on the left. But this is where the moderation side of Stoicism should come in. And it's so difficult to listen to a debate, for example, and when you're really, you're rooting for one person on that side, it's so difficult to accept that the other person says something worthwhile or has an excellent point or is saying something far more rational than the other person. Would you agree in that? Like, it's really difficult with this tribal mentality?
I think it's impossible.
Yeah,
actually.
Yes.
It's like it's become very religious in the sense, and I don't mean necessarily a particular religion, but religious in the sense that dogmatic. Like, if I believe that God did this, therefore anybody else's God could not have done that. I exclude that as a possibility. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, has spilled over to political debates. So if the right wing said this, then what the left wing says is completely wrong. And that's a very dangerous path to take.
Well, it's almost the anti-Stoic path to take. It's
absolutely
the opposite.
It's absolutely anti. And more than anti-Stoic, it's dangerous. It leads to indifference. For example, a lot of people say, "Well, I would never be part of the Hitler Youth, for example. And I say most people who were part of that were ignorant, either because they chose to be, or because during that period of time maybe their educational level wasn't so great. And so when they were offered an opportunity at Hitler Youth, it was the first time they had a sense of power over their own lives, right? So most people weren't like anti, say, Jewish sentiment, but they were indifferent to the anti-Jewish sentiment. So as a Stoic, you might say, well, I don't really have, I don't belong to one or the other. But if being neutral doesn't really help either, because neutral means you take the sides of the powerful. But that's not my quote. That's by a guy called Paulo Freire, a Brazilian anthropologist, who says there are no neutrals. Because if I decide to turn a blind eye to this craziness going on, say, in Facebook, if I then suddenly see that there's a group dominating, say, a Facebook group, then I will see that right-wing ideology or left-wing ideology will come through. And that's not such a bad thing necessarily on a Facebook group. When you multiply that on a mass scale, then as a Stoic, I am called into action. So a lot of people have said, so you mean that I should be apolitical, I shouldn't vote? No, quite the opposite. You should be very careful. Your vote is very important. You vote in how you spend your money and also how you tick a box. But also to communicate to others that as a Stoic, you're not going to take sides based on the person saying it, unless the person saying it is making sense. So somebody asked me this morning, does that mean I should vote for Trump or Hillary? Now, it's difficult for me as a Stoic. It possibly might mean I should vote for neither. Because it's not that there's only two parties and they say then your vote is wasted. But as a Stoic, you are called to take the reasonable path. And so even if, anxious Stoic would say that the reasonable path was, say, committing suicide, I'm not suggesting that. But then if they said that, then taking the side of somebody who may not get into power because they don't belong to either party might be the most Stoic thing to do. Because at least you're showing support to the person who's having the most rational discourse, who is really saying, no, I don't subscribe to this ideology or this one. I subscribe to truth. And that's a very hard path to take, but it's something worth considering.
I actually agree with you there. I really do have a big problem with the idea that, if there is no other better option, then you have to go with one of the bad options. Like the whole US election last time was, which evil are we going to choose? The lesser of two evils. But, and then when Trump actually won, there were all the people coming out and saying, well, people who voted for Gary Johnson should have just voted for, Hillary Clinton. Then maybe she would have gotten through. But, I have a problem with that because of what you're saying, because then you're not making your choice based on who is actually the best, and you're not showing your support for the best candidate. You're showing your support for somebody who is just less bad. and that to me is a sign that you're really relinquishing your is that the right word?
Yes.
Your ability to make any change. You're just saying, okay, well, I'm just going to accept that this is how we're going to get through this. And I do think it's the wrong choice to just go with the lesser of two bads when you know that there is another person. And I don't necessarily subscribe to the views of Gary Johnson. In fact, I know pretty much nothing about what he said, but I do disagree with saying that you should just vote for somebody if it means that the other person isn't going. Yeah. Anyway,
I think it's actually, as you say, I think it's unstoic to just, you're basically deciding to side with the popular opinion. It's not a rational decision at that point from your own, in the sense that it doesn't necessarily increase justice. It doesn't necessarily increase your aspect of self-control. In fact, the opposite. It's not necessarily wise, because you decide that your wisdom is not as good as the crowd's wisdom. I mean, whoever said I think we said before that Stoicism is hard because it calls someone to be consistent. But I also think, I don't know much about him either, but doesn't that tell you everything? That it would encourage that person,
exactly,
even if they got one more vote, to continue to stand, because there's nothing more disheartening to say, I told the truth, I fact-checked, I sat for 4 years checking through why I should stand, and then no one voted for me. Not because my ideas were bad, but because I wasn't the right person. And that's something like I think Massimo says as well. It's like sometimes people talk about philosophy, and there was like Kanye West has this sort of philosophy book or something coming out, and more people are going. It saddens me that more people will listen to his philosophy. I use the word loosely, just because he happens to be Kanye West, instead of the fact that his ideas happen to be good or bad. And that's when I struggle, because it's such an unstable position to have to grapple with. Like, really?
Well, I mean, I have to disagree with you there. I think apart from Stoicism, Kanye West is the greatest philosopher of our time. Absolutely getting there. But in all seriousness, I do hope that he runs for presidency next time, because that will be even funnier than what we just saw. That's just the bystanding spectator in me coming out there. But I can sit over here in Australia and be safe, and nobody's ever going to mess with us because we're too far away. But it is fun to watch sometimes. But I think this would be a good time to actually bring this quote in, because I wrote down this quote in preparation for talking to you, because I think it's one of the most important things that Seneca has ever said, and it is so true. It has stood the test of time. He said, "Often injustice lies in what you aren't doing, not only in what you are doing." So maybe I'd like to know from you, what do you think we as Stoics need to do more of in order to make sure that we are really following the Stoic virtue of justice? Like, what is it that we're not doing right now?
As a community?
Yeah, I mean, as a community, obviously everybody's different.
Or as academics, sorry. Do you mean like the general Stoic community, or as academics?
Well, I mean, you could go both. I guess as humanity, what do you think that humanity is not doing right now that we should be doing a lot more of? Maybe something that Stoicism would encourage us to do?
I think, again, well, I'll start with smaller, because it's harder with all humanity. But as Stoics, I think we tend to overemphasize what Seneca said. Now, I think what Seneca said is very important, as I wouldn't quote him in my work. But sometimes there's an overemphasis of Seneca said this, or Aurelius said this. I'm like, yes, and what is the modern understanding of how you can integrate that? So I feel that in the Stoic community, what I have seen is this sort of real zeal, and I use that word on purpose, a real zeal for what people said before us. But even Seneca warned us against that. So yes, we can take that, but how we apply it, it's kind of like, okay, I understand what this person said, and in my personal life, this is how I apply it, because that's really easy. To then take it and go, for example, is there a gender pay gap? And to do a lot of research to find out if there really is, and to understand the nuances. That's what I haven't seen on Facebook. I sometimes read people having a fight over some idea or another, and then I've asked them, have you actually read what the person posted? And they'll turn around and say no. And that's happened on many, 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 too many occasions. I'm like, but that person has gone out of their way to publish this work. I'm not necessarily talking about myself, although it has happened to me too, but it's happened to others. And you're having a debate about their work, but you haven't actually read it. That's a very poor reflection on you as a person. Yeah. Because that's not Socratic at all. Basically, you haven't even listened to the person's debate, and you've flown straight in and said something. Yeah, I mean, that doesn't tend to happen in your group, but
no. I want to agree with you there, because what I see that you're saying here is that people aren't going deep enough into forming their own opinions. And it's so true. Today we are a world of headline readers. That even to the point where with blog posts, the blog posts that get the most traffic are going to be the ones with dot points. Because it just makes it, and that's just a fact, and I love a blog post with dot points, especially if it's something like, I am such a sucker for these posts that are like, here are the top 10 secrets to being successful, or if you've got these 5 traits, then you're going to be this kind of person. I'm an absolute sucker for them, I will admit right now, but I love a dot point blog post, because it's easy. You read like 5 headlines and you're like, bam, I've just but that's everything that's wrong with the world today as well, that people read the headlines and bam, they've formed their opinion. But you really have to go a little bit deeper. And as Stoics, I absolutely need people to understand this. We have this, as you say, an obligation to go a little bit deeper into our studies and our education, and to really get to the bottom of these big issues. And I just want to chuck a little side note on there that, look, there are so many big issues. There are so many things that we could be focusing on. So nobody has enough time to focus on every big issue. That's why we have the Kai Whitings of the world, because Kai is going to be focusing on these issues a little bit more than all the rest of us. But, if you're passionate about something, and if you believe that you have a strong opinion about something, have the research to back it up and go a little bit deeper than you would with other subjects, so that you actually know. And this is something that I struggle with. It's something that we all struggle with. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Kai.
No, I think that's an excellent piece of news, and an excellent statement. Sorry, and that's why I said, when you said now you know, and I clarified to you that I don't know. Why do I not know? Because I'm not an expert on Neanderthals, and I don't claim to be. What I can say is I'm an expert on how Neanderthals can integrate into Stoicism. I'm the only person there's four of us that could say that we're experts on it, right? But I'm very clear about where my expertise lies and where it doesn't. And I think as Stoics, we also have to say, for example, in my day job, I know a lot about environment, I know a lot about social justice, but I know nothing about how to fix a car. So don't trust me, don't deliver your car to me and ask me to fix it. But yet when it's something that we think is as of opinion, we say, well, everyone's entitled to an opinion. And I'm like, yes, but it doesn't mean that it's an informed one. And there's also this sort of nature in today's society. You ask what we could do is to start respecting more certain people's professions. So artists, philosophers, writers, even librarians, to understand that when we go, a librarian may well know more than we do about what we should read for something. And we try to say, I'm too busy, I prefer the listicle, which I thankfully do not like as an academic. 5 things. I'm like, but I've read a lot of things on Stoicism that have nothing to do with Stoicism. They're just so-called 5 things that will make you a better Stoic. And then you're like, you really don't understand Stoicism. And I look up the credentials of the person, and they have not studied it. They haven't got necessarily the right grounding. I'm not saying you have to have a philosophy degree, but they have it has no indication that they know what they're talking about.
Kai's actually talking about one of the things that he read on my website there.
That's not true. I actually listen to your podcast. You know I do. So.
Yeah, I'll be the first to admit, I think in my first episode I said I'm not an expert on Stoicism. I'm learning just like you. But the dedication that I gave there was that I am going to be learning. I am going to be going deeper into it and really trying to get out the helpful pieces of wisdom that can help us to immediately apply this philosophy into our life. And I mean, you talked about that earlier as well, actually applying the philosophy, not just reading, this is what this person said, but actually saying, okay, what do they mean by that? And how can I actually use this right now? Is also incredibly important. I'm sure you'd agree.
I do, but I have a question for you, actually. I'm going to tell the tales, but
oh no.
Yeah. So when say for example, you read the Neanderthal piece, right? Is there anything that jumped out to you as that is something I need to reconsider in my life, or something that maybe I should not necessarily reconsider, but add to what I already know? What was something that's talk to you really?
Well, honestly, it does come back to that. I honestly, for my whole life, have had this connection with animals and nature. I grew up on a farm. I was around animals, cows. At one stage I owned about 100 chickens and turkeys, and so I already kind of had this view of how we are connected on more levels than one. The fact that we're just on this earth together, but I really do appreciate the ask that question, because what it did for me was it said, okay, well, that's a creature that we were related to. Like myself as a European, my father's from Britain. I grew up in Australia. Like as a European, I probably have a certain percentage of Neanderthal in me. And it's interesting to ask that question, because to me it says, yes, that's another layer that we can take away from it's us versus the animals. And now it's like, okay, well, that some people might say that was just, a slightly more evolved, chimpanzee, but now it's like, well, could other animals be more rational than we think? Could we be connected on even more levels than we think? And I really love that worldview, because I think, for me, this is a weird thing, but I empathize more with animals than I do with humans. I don't know if you feel similar, but for me, like, if I see an animal being hurt, or if I see somebody treating an animal in an inhumane way, even that word inhumane, inhumans, like I see that and it makes me feel horrible. And I think that all of us could really learn a little bit more that it's not us and nature. It's actually like, as in, the way you treat nature actually improves or degrades your own life. And everybody else's life. I don't know if I made any sort of point there, but
well, you did, because
that's kind of what I got
we
out.
study I teach, whatever you think is as nature is probably a degradation of what your parents saw, which is a degradation of what your grandparents saw, which is a degradation to every single generation. We think of nature as a little bit more degraded in the West. And yes, there are different times. Roman times were very polluted, but can you imagine, like, if every generation thinks that what they have left is nature, how we've robbed them? Like, we've robbed so many of the next generations of wonder, of the ability to say, wow, and look at a rainforest and not think about it as in terms of, oh, look at the medicine there, or look at the wood there, but to look at it as just a beautiful thing that regulates our climate, that gives us the sense of joy and peace, knowing that animals can do what they need to do and plants can do what they need to do there. And we've robbed so many generations of that. Even in terms of being a vegetarian, you have to be so careful where you get your soya from. Palm oil is such a problem. So you even say, well, I'm vegetarian. That doesn't take you off the hook. But it's just a great opportunity as a Stoic, I think, to engage in what you've just said. To not necessarily, I wouldn't say necessarily defend animal rights, because it's not a very Stoic position, but certainly reconsider our relationship with animals and plants. I mean, a tree got cut down outside my house in the street, and I had tears in my eyes because I know that the other trees will know that. Feels like, well, it's only just a tree, but it isn't to me. It was there's some kind of rationality, not to the level that Neanderthals had, that we have. That means that they communicate. That means that there is community. And to take that away just because, for example, people were complaining about the leaves falling on their cars, it just got to me. Like, that tree's been there longer than the car has. So to reassess and reevaluate our boundaries, and to remember that in Stoicism there's only one sense of us versus them, and that's us versus the sages. Right? There's no other distinction in Stoicism at all, not based on gender, not based on race, not based on height, not based on religion, not based on anything, but the ability or the capacity, and then the ability to act rationally. And that's, I think, a beautiful thing.
And I mean, I'd like to add something to what I said as well, and maybe add something to this. Because some people might be listening and they might be thinking, okay, well, what are you suggesting, that we live in a world where we don't eat plants, we don't eat animals? I mean, what are we going to eat? Like, there's is this some sort of futuristic? What am I trying to say here? Like, everything is one kind of universe. It might it has the potential to sound very airy fairy, sort of up in the clouds. What I'm saying, but for me, I think it's about respect. And it's about having an admiration for all of the beauty that nature provides us, and not overdoing your consumption of nature to the best of your abilities. If I could just share one quick story. I mean, when I was younger, I went on this kind of camp. It was over a few days. It was actually with a church group, and we were pulling these carts for a few days, and it was supposed to be like an experience to learn about how people used to live. And so they brought out these chickens, and I actually had many chickens when I was growing up. I had turkeys as well and pigeons, and I absolutely love these animals. But they brought these chickens out to kill and for us to eat. And I had no problem with that because I had raised 30 meat chickens before. I'd killed all of them myself. I plucked them and everything. I'd done everything, and it was some of the best meat that I've ever had. And I did it myself, so I knew I was taking care of these birds. But they brought out these animals, and with a lot of the youth, it was kind of like a joke, that, oh, we're going to put this chicken down and we're going to chop its head off with an axe. And people were laughing, and, they'd kind of miss, and it'd be a joke. And I remember just feeling sick, like seeing that these people hadn't been raised to respect nature, to respect animals. They'd been raised in a way that says we are given this earth, and anything else doesn't have a soul. It doesn't have rationality. It doesn't have anything that allows it to feel anything. And so you can basically treat it how you want. It's not going to feel anything. So this is all just a joke anyway. So, there was a lack of respect for the animals that they were killing there. And I think for me, it's about, having that respect, having that deeper connection that says the way I treat nature, the way I treat animals is also the way that I treat myself and humanity. It's not, there's no separation there. I think I talked to you about this last time where I mentioned somebody said on the Joe Rogan podcast, they rewrote the golden rule from, treat people how you'd want to be treated yourself. It's not that, it's treat people kindly because they are you, and so like everybody's connected. But yeah, for me, that's what it's about. It's about respecting nature and actually having that deeper connection that says this is more important than what I'm giving it importance. I didn't say that correctly, but hopefully you can save me there.
Yeah, absolutely, you're absolutely right. And I'd like to clarify as well that we're not saying, don't eat this or don't eat that. And I often find that's a straw man argument. I'm obviously not advocating for mass starvation because we can't eat anything. What I'm trying to advocate is what you're doing just? Is it reasonable? Like in my case, I am now vegetarian. I used to eat meat 3 times a day because I bodybuilt. So it was really important to me. And then for example, I was in the gym for 2 hours yesterday, plus like 1 hour of stretches. I was in the gym for 3 hours on Wednesday. I was in the gym for 3 hours on Monday. Like when I tell you that I bodybuild, I take it very seriously. I really train hard to the point that I was almost throwing up twice this week. So when I say I took meat out of my diet, that wasn't an easy thing for me to do because everything had told me, no, you're never going to build muscle. And actually, I've built more muscle since being vegetarian because I can train for longer. Now, you said, well, I haven't got that. People might say to me, well, I don't have the dedication. Yeah, but if you feel that bodybuilding is like your amateur sport, you will find the hours to do it. So, yeah, it's something that I had to step back and look at and say, do I really need to eat like chicken for breakfast? Do I really need to do that? So I'm not advocating for, complete utopia. What I am advocating for is looking at where you get your meat from. Like I have no issue. If someone gave me some lamb because they had raised this lamb on their farm and killed the lamb themselves, and I know the person and I ate a little bit of what they gave me. That's not what we're saying. But when you look at, say, the mass killing or the joking of killing animals or people cutting trees down because they're inconvenient, that's a different situation. And the Stoics, we have to evaluate, where is that line? Maybe not an easy line to draw, but I think we can all agree, at least on this podcast, that laughing because you can't kill an animal quickly is unreasonable. And it conflicts with your lack of self-control because you didn't train properly. And there's a lot, for example, Steve on the Sunday Stoic podcast, he also teaches people how to hunt efficiently so that they kill what they're hunting and the deer, for example, and they don't leave it injured. to die slowly. So yeah, I think with Stoicism it's like to reflect and to make one change at a time, because it's very difficult to make more. But if I could encourage you to make one change in your life, I'd say like make sure you, at the very least, you read a book a month, if not a book a week, and you expand your knowledge, and you don't just accept your Twitter feed or the algorithm that feeds into your Facebook or your YouTube as truth. That would be the one thing I would ask for.
Yeah, and look, I think that is actually the perfect place to finish the interview, because I think that that's just such a good call to action. So yeah, I mean, start reading, start getting educated, go beyond the headline, go a little bit deeper into the issues that you feel like you know a lot about. If you have a strong opinion about something, but you're getting that strong opinion from, one headline, rethink it. And if I could add something, I always do this. I bring you on here, and then I bring my guests on, and then I end up taking over in these areas. But I just want to add something that's been really helpful to me over the past couple of months in terms of expanding my knowledge has been going on YouTube, typing in a certain topic, and then finishing that search with debate. So just watching a debate between two people where one person is arguing one side, the other person's arguing the other, it's so helpful. It'll help your communication skills, because you'll be able to actually debate your opinions in a better way. And it'll also inform your opinion, because you'll be hearing both sides from very intelligent people. So read a book a month or a week, and watch a debate every month or every week or every day. That's where we'll leave. But Kai, was there anything else that you wanted to share with our audience before we head off? What's happening next for you? I know you mentioned to me the other day that you're taking a break, but after that break, what's going on?
Yeah, I'm taking a mini break. It's going to be about 2 weeks, but I really need it. But we're writing a paper on sustainable education and what it means within Stoicism, because I think the next step is, because you and I are calling for people to like educate themselves, was then like, what do I mean by educate? What do I mean by education? How does that reflect on like a Stoic framework? So that's the next paper. It kind of, okay, now we know what it is to be human, and we've got some blog posts about social justice. Now it's like, okay, you keep telling me about education, Guy. What do you mean? So that I thought, okay, we should respond to that, because a lot of people go, what do you mean by education? What kind of education do you mean? Do you mean I should go back to school? Not necessarily, but yeah. So we're doing a bit of that. So hopefully the next podcast we can debate, we can take where we've just left off from watching debates and reading, and really delve into what education means and how it reflects or doesn't current education in the Stoic framework.
Awesome. Kai, you are always welcome on here. I think, one of the reasons why I really do enjoy these conversations with you is because you are calling people to get more highly educated. And it's, you obviously have many views that are quite strong in certain areas of life, and it's good to be exposed to that, because obviously some people will agree, some people will disagree. I feel like we've actually gone over a few of those issues in here, but we haven't actually gone deeper into them in terms of discussion. That might be good, because we might disagree, but the overall framework that you're viewing life through is this framework of Stoicism, which says you need to go a little bit deeper, you need to get educated. If you're going to have an opinion, it should be backed up. And I love that. So thank you for being that kind of person. And please let me know when you want to come back on, and we'll have another discussion about education. And awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks. Ciao. All right, so there you have it, my interview with Kai Whiting, part 2. And look, I really hope you enjoyed that. If you have any questions or if you have any feedback, please get to me or get to Kai and let us know. We'd love to hear from you. And as usual, please let me know if there's any people who you'd like to have on the show. I know I still have to action a few of those requests. I know there are a lot of people that you guys want on here, so I'm getting through them one at a time. But apart from that, I hope that you guys have an amazing day, an amazing week, whatever you're doing, and I'll talk to you next time. But until then, I hope that this episode has helped you on your rise to the good life. Ciao. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Practical Stoic Podcast. I hope it's been valuable for you. And if you'd like to support the show, then you can go to patreon.com/Simon Drew. If you'd like to try mindset coaching with me, then you can book your first free consultation by going to risetothegoodlife.com/coaching. To join the community, just go to Facebook and search for the Practical Stoic Mastermind. The links to all of these places are included in the show notes, but for now, this is Simon Drew signing out.